Hello and welcome to The Next Horizon, an LTIMindtree podcast on the topic of metaverse in the metaverse. And for today's podcast, we've custom built this space in spatial.io. I'm your host, Saurabh Ambani, logging in from New Jersey, and my co-host is...
Naina Raut from Mumbai.
And in each episode, we invite key industry leaders and tech visionaries to hear what they have to say about the metaverse and the technologies that enable it. And in this episode, we have with us Prashant Kelkar, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at ISG, Digital Advisory and Sourcing. Prashant brings more than 25 years of experience that spans a range of industries, including financial services, telecom, media, automotive, and utilities, and a range of geographies, including Europe, the Americas, and India. Welcome to the show, Prashant. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me here, Saurabh.
And Prashant, I must say your avatar resembles you so well.
Oh, thanks. Working hard on it. I'm signing in from New York, just for the record.
That's fantastic. That's the beauty of metaverse, right? All right. With that note, let's get the podcast started. So, Prashant, why don't we start with your definition of what a metaverse is, and how do you see that it has evolved over the last few months or year, perhaps?
That's a broad question. For me, metaverse it's a singular word. It's not a multiple word. So it's like the word internet. So you can talk about worlds, connected spaces, but the metaverse is like the internet. There are not many internets, if you get my drift. So that's where I stem my definition from. So if you go to that definition, I'm much more on Matthew Ball's definition, and he talks much more about how worlds which are completely immersive and rendered and 3D and real time. Right? So these are the four things which bring a world and space together. Now, if you have these in a way that they are interconnected, that's where the magic happens. Though the revenue models, I think, are on the physical to digital space and not purely on the digital. That would be my broad definition.
Sure, that is very interesting. And coming back to the point, I know that amongst other things, you very closely follow Web3, DAO, NFTs, AI, and see that metaverse is often represented as coming together of blockchain, AI, ML, Web3, NFTs, digital twins, etc. Right? So, according to you, how much of metaverse is dependent on these, or do you think it can coexist independently as well?
For me, metaverse is a form factor. Just like the devices that all of us are wearing is a form factor. The metaverse is also a form factor. Now you can go into that space to experience things. Now, just like you have IoT, which is Internet of Things, you have the things in the metaverse. So you have a metaverse of things. You don't go into the metaverse to see the metaverse. You go into the metaverse to do something. Like we've come into this metaverse to run a podcast, but the concept of podcast existed before we met together in the metaverse. So it's much more about what are the things. So if you look at metaverse as a form factor, as a UI factor, then how do you actually manifest the things? That's where concepts like Web3 and NFT and DAO come in. If NFT is probably the only way to look at assets and to create digital assets of it, and to have an entity which is on one side programmable, but also a capture of value. We've never had this before. So if you look at NFT as a concept, it could exist outside the metaverse. It's just when you bring the two together, things get interesting. NFT itself is a digital asset which runs on a blockchain. So think of blockchain as the equivalent of storage and compute. Think of NFTs as digital assets, and think of digital assets as workloads of trust running on a blockchain. So if you go down that path, all of that substrate existed before the metaverse and can coexist outside the metaverse. It's only when you bring it together that the magic happens. And the magic could happen is what happens when you leave the metaverse and get into the physical world? What do you carry back with you? How does that relate to the physical things? What are the physical and digital business models? I think that's where I think we'll finally go. But this entire description is just a one-on-one, and you raised the last acronym DAO. And DAO is how do you do these things as a community, right? I don't know whether have you read Balaji Srinivasan's book, The Network State? It's a very, very interesting thing, and he talks about how actually communities get formed, and those communities take the form of something very similar to a nation state. That's the power of DAO. So I see the stack as metaverse being the form factor, DAO bringing the community together. As you say, Saurabh, you say direct to avatar, it's also direct to customer, it's actually direct to community, so that's the third C. And then NFT is the capture of value, which is programmable, running on a blockchain.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, very interesting. And we've just added a book to our list of reads now. So thank you for the recommendation. But I just want to follow up on this. It now seems like metaverse is then just going to be a channel, right? A channel you use to say reach your community, a channel you use to reach your customers and employees, right? It'll become that one more interface, as technology then matures. Do you agree with that?
Well, you don't know where things start, right? Do you create things to experience in a channel, or does the channel change what you can experience? It feels bidirectional to me. So at the moment, I think we are taking ideas from the past and taking it into the future. So it's almost every idea that we're coming up for the metaverse feels in one way skeuomorphic. I think the native use cases are yet to be discovered, and to that actually our interest goes more towards B2B as opposed to B2C. I think B2B will lead the way in metaverse. That's where the large investments go, and at some point it'll spill over into B2C. So in fact, this might go the exact opposite direction as mobile did. Mobile started B2C and then went B2C.
And Prashant, I know we mentioned several things. We mentioned Web3, DAO, NFT, etc. But I just want to take what's an advisor's viewpoint with regards to the hype of metaverse, and I'm sure you get that a lot. So what's your take on that? And a follow-up to that is, underneath all the euphoria of possibilities, what real-world applications hold true value? Can you just shed some light on that?
I think if there's one role we would have as ISG and literally any third-party advisor, Saurabh, it is to separate the reality from hype. So all our advice goes under the guiding light of keep this action-oriented within the next 24 months. Anything beyond the next 24 months can be altruistic as best or visionary at worst, right? So if we keep everything that we can do or think about within the next 24 months, it tends to get more action-oriented. So that is how we define separating reality from hype. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is to actually track use cases. And the best use cases are never found in your own industry. Like we were just talking to a cruise line, and I'm not at liberty to tell you what the use case is, but they were picking up use cases from the hospitality industry in hotels, right? To see what could we take from there and apply it actually to a cruise line. Now, is this B2C? Is it B2B? Is it B2B2C? You see, it's a mix of all. So on one side, if we can separate reality from hype, and on the other side, if we can track real-world use cases which are attracting investments, our entire attention goes towards not just what the use case is, but why are they doing it? And it tends to be one of three. You're either optimizing some operation, or you're creating new revenue from existing products, or you're creating a brand new product. It tends to be one of these three. That's where our role comes in, to bring these aspects together. We stay out of implementation and we're relying on someone like LTIMindtree to bring this to life. Now that would be the reactive side of this, Saurabh. But what you and I do is also look little ahead and show the industry what's possible. And that's where I love interactions with companies like LTIMindtree.
Super. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of overlap between these industries when we look at use cases, be it as you give the example of hospitality and how that can be applied to several other industries. I think there's also application that cuts across, be it banking, finance, be it automotive. So I think the possibilities are just huge at this point.
It's huge, and I would drive more attention towards asset-heavy industries. Asset-heavy industries have a lot to gain from, let's not use the word metaverse and let's use the word AR and VR instead. And you have a lot to gain from that. I mean, simple concepts like digital twin are at best brought form with AR and VR. Now, if you do collaborative design using digital twin, you're literally doing metaverse without saying metaverse. Take another concept like digital thread, which is actually your smart factory design. And that's the AR VR rendition of your smart shop floor. Again, you're doing all of this and doing metaverse instead of saying metaverse. But imagine if we did all of this right now, and towards tomorrow, it starts becoming real-time 3D immersive and persistent. And these worlds start getting interoperable with each other. And we are able to get into this world and come out of this world, and everything that we have done and own is persistent. That's, I think, where we should be heading. What do you think, Saurabh? You're into this as much as I am.
I totally agree. I think even though we've seen the early adopters to be the likes of media, gaming, entertainment industries, I think there's a lot of potential as far as the industrial metaverse is concerned. I mean, you brought up the topic of digital twins, which has been around for some time, but I think the logical extension is to move them into metaverse, run simulations and see how those assets would react and if they would require maintenance and how do we operate them more efficiently. But just going back to one of the things that you ended with, so interoperability, that is a perfect segue into the next question that I had for you. We know today that there are several metaverses that exist, and some of them are based on the key tenets of decentralization, so Decentraland, Sandbox. The other ones are more of walled gardens. Do you see these converging at any point in the future and fulfilling the utopian dream of interoperability? Do you think that's going to happen sooner than later, or it might not happen at all?
I get the entire narrative around decentralization of Web3. But there is a cynic in me, Saurabh. And that cynic says, I don't know whether you need 7,000 partners for running digital identity as you go across virtual worlds. So, a new one might emerge. So will today's walled gardens exist? I don't know yet. I mean, some might not. You can already see Microsoft and Facebook come together. So some of these might merge, some of them might go their separate ways, some might dismantle. I would prefer to think of this as re-centralization as opposed to decentralization. So on one side, we will have new partners or new platforms emerging to solve things like wallets and identity and common things, right? Think of this as the pickaxes towards the gold rush. On the other side, Web3 is much more of a back-end play than it is a front-end play. The metaverse is a front-end play. Web3 is a protocol play which tends to be back-end. Now, protocols by default are decentralized. So I think while worlds might be together and interoperable, the backend on which it's running could be decentralized. Somewhere in there, I think, is the thing. I think to think everything is decentralized might be too utopic.
Yeah, and I think that to a large extent, that's the promise that NFT brings to the table, at least from when we speak about assets, right? That you can move your assets from one world to the other, and if they are uniquely represented as NFTs, probably it just makes that transition much easier.
I'm glad you bring up NFTs. The entire narrative on NFTs is how do I have a digital asset and how do I actually keep it programmable and alive. I think the aspect most of the world's missing on NFTs is the ability to manage and create micro communities. Right, so that takes the power back from the big five who are running today's community platforms. It actually brings your direct to customer vision back to life. In fact, now it brings you to direct to customer community. It brings back power if you're an enterprise. So if NFT is done well, there's a community angle to it that I think many people are missing.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that eventually we'll look beyond the speculative nature of NFTs and see it for what it's worth, especially given the recent events in the market. But speaking of the recent events, actually, I have a question around that as well. So they say that technology is accelerating faster than our ability to adapt, perhaps also faster than our ability to control and regulate it. So how do you think regulation and governance will catch up, and what needs to be done? And I remember for one of the previous questions, you said you gave a timeline of about 24 months. So is there a timeline that you can associate it with this aspect as well, strictly speaking about regulation and governance?
I think these elements will start coming in. Now, I think you're going to guess where my opinions lie when I say that actually regulation and governance is anti-innovation. So there's this balance to be achieved, right? So you can't have regulation and innovation at the same time. Somewhere in the middle is the promise. Now you can't have complete innovation because then you've seen what happens to a company like FTX. So somewhere in there is the middle, but it's much easier to go, instead of saying regulation and governance, start aiming towards business outcomes and to say how much of business outcome can I achieve as a firm, and as I do that, what does this do to the choice of decision? Now, if you invest with me, Saurabh, my assurance should be, can I keep your investment safe? Now, what would be bad is if I decide where you invest. That is still your decision. Now, how much regulation should go into you're making a choice of where to invest? Right? I think somewhere there is the line between innovation and regulation governance. Of course, I'm all for regulation governance. You've seen the billions we lost now in FTX, and now Binance is the only player left.
I think I do agree to your point that to some extent regulation might stifle innovation, but I think there has to be a fine balance between the two, because at the end of the day, it should not be the retail investor and common man that is left with the pack. So yeah, it's an interesting point. Thanks for that.
I think you'll have more bodies coming up, and bodies of standards have they're like their own rabbit holes, because they can get influenced too by which player wants to see which feature in the standard. But I think you'll slowly start seeing bodies of standards coming up, especially in the entire stack of metaverse to Web3 to NFTs and to DAO. I think just 1 or 2 days ago, the UK has brought out a way to regulate DAOs. So you can already start seeing this come through.
That is very interesting. So as we innovate and sort of govern these spaces, what would successful metaverse implementation look like for a large organization, right? And what, according to you, are some of the key metrics that measure it?
Actually, one part of me is a little worried that we start going metaverse first into this discussion. It's like in 2012 we said let's go cloud first, and then in 2008 we said let's go mobile first, and now we're saying AI first. I would love to avoid a metaverse first discussion. If I take a parallel and if we ask a few CIOs what they think about their cloud journeys so far, they would say cloud has largely lived up to its promise, except no one expected the invoice to double, right? So nobody, you couldn't see this 10 years ago. So I'm slightly allergic towards keeping technology first. So instead of saying cloud first or metaverse first, I think we should start saying business outcome first. And what's the business outcome you're trying to achieve? And if metaverse has a play in it, sure, then do it, right? But it could be just a Web3 play, then do that instead. So the more I think we take and that's where I think LTIMindtree and ISG should work together, right? To nudge this industry and say, well, it's not about being technology first, it's being about business outcome first. Technology, including metaverse, is just an enabler. Having said that, Saurabh, we probably together as companies, as implementers and TPAs, also need to tell the world what the rest of the world is doing. What are the leaders doing? What does good look like? Where is the North Star?
Sure. And in that light, do you see some industries and some use cases being strong contenders to just set an example for the other industries?
You're right. I think you can take lessons from the leaders of what Nike did, of what Gucci did. Right, so these are companies that understand product branding and how to actually take an asset and create value out of that asset. They know how to do this with physical assets. Now they've taken that intelligence and brought it to a digital asset. So these are things you can immediately learn from them. Now, if you're a manufacturing firm or you're a medtech firm, and you're trying to figure out what is my digital and physical balance in my value proposition, you can immediately start taking lessons not from your own industry but from parallel industries like luxury retail and retail. I think the more we do that and start looking for patterns, businesses should maintain a lattice work of mental models for metaverse and Web3. At the same time, if you look towards manufacturing and if you look towards small device manufacturing, you start seeing, and complex manufacturing, so small device and complex manufacturing, you start seeing what industrial metaverse could look like. I mean, look at what NVIDIA just piloted with BMW and starts giving you a feeling of where this could be headed. The more I think we look outside towards industry leaders and what they're doing in aspects that they're good at, the more I think we can borrow and bring to life.
Got it. That is an interesting take.
It's funny that you mentioned NVIDIA, because one thing that I'm kind of wondering about is what's the correlation of hardware with regards to the actual output, in the sense that we know that for us to be able to work on Omniverse, there's a specification that we need to adhere to, and the GPUs that we're talking about are more expensive and hard to obtain. So what's your take on that? I mean, how much of the advancement in metaverse would be a function of the hardware availability?
A lot, Saurabh, and I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say that, because you and I had this discussion over dinner some time ago. I think it's bidirectional, right? I mean, there's only so much hardware can do. Hardware takes its impulses from what software needs, and software takes its impulses from what hardware makes possible. This has been true for the last 30 years. It will still continue to be true. So the more we know what parts should be real time, what does immersive actually mean, how much of precision do we need when we go 3D? Think remote precision surgery. Those are the elements which will come back into the hardware part of the world. And now whether it is NVIDIA or others, they're going to take their impulses from what the business cases are, use cases are, and what the software needs to make possible. I think this will be a bidirectional journey. So it's good not just to track what someone like NVIDIA does, but also to track what others need from NVIDIA. So I would also start looking at what Apple's doing, what Facebook is doing, and I should say Meta nowadays.
Yeah, I think we are, not just us, I mean, the entire world is kind of waiting for the next Apple Glass that is hopefully being launched next year. So yeah, let's see where that takes us. what are some of the use cases that nobody seems to be talking about? Like everybody seems to be missing that, but has a lot of potential.
I think any use case to do with community, Saurabh. I don't know why most of the use cases that we are hearing as ISG tend to be one-to-one. It's business to customer or business to business. We're just not hearing enough use cases in business to community. It looks like everybody's missing the community angle on not just metaverse, but also concepts like NFT. I mean, now if there was now a time to take the power back of not just creating your communities, but also managing your communities and monetizing them, this is the time. Like, I don't know what happens to Twitter now, I mean, given the last 10 days. But before that, Twitter was the best platform for micro communities. It was. Except that a lot of power was not with you because Twitter knew what your micro community was. Now, I don't know what happens to Twitter, that remains to be seen, but now's the time to take the power back if you're an enterprise, right? NFT has given you the way to create community. Metaverse becomes potentially one of the form factors of experiencing that community. How do you monetize that? You monetize that not just by feeding the community, but also listening to the community, engaging, and having a feedback loop back to see what designs can I bring back into the community, into our design. There's not enough talk about community, Saurabh. It's maybe you can hear the frustration in my voice, but I think that's where the use cases are missing to a point.
And it is really interesting, Prashant, that you brought that point. The reason being, I spoke briefly about the survey that we'd done with 500 plus consumers, right? Gen Zs and millennials. And when we asked them of use cases or spaces that they would want to try beyond gaming, they talked about media and entertainment, they talked about retail, and they also talked about socializing. And I think that's like a huge miss out there that we as people not really thinking about. But that's a brilliant point, and it reflects the youth and it reflects the generation that's going to be the most active on this channel or this platform, to say.
Exactly, Naina. And you made an interesting point. You spoke about gaming. I think if there's one industry sector everybody can look to, they should look at gaming. Gaming is the one industry sector which has set impulses for everything else. Think communities, think virtual worlds, think GPUs, right? Everything we get from is from gaming. Now you can poo-poo gaming and you can say this is not for everyone, but I think that's one aspect. That's one industry we should definitely be tracking. Naina, but you see as much as I do. What do you feel about these same answers? Where do you think the use cases are?
Yes, right. We've been discussing the industrial metaverse, right? Media is another strong extension of the gaming industry. And the third use case that we've seen a lot of traction amongst our customers is the enterprise side of it, right? Office twins, collaboration spaces for employees, onboarding spaces. These are spaces that companies across industry are investing in. So yes, three areas for sure.
Naina, when we spoke last time, you made an interesting point. You said that this could also be a way to begin and start to see what metaverse feels like. You spoke about how enterprises could start experimenting with metaverses in simple cases like onboarding.
Yeah, sure. So. Mhm. I think there is a lot of skepticism to take metaverse spaces directly to the consumers. And with what we've seen so far, as we have these conversations with, multiple customers, like we are in this platform today, right? We see a lot of realism, but if you look at the avatars, our avatars don't really have very realistic gestures, right? So there is some sort of disconnect between our limbs because, of course, we're using physical controllers and things like that, right? So until the time we use haptics and our expressions become more real, or we actually talk about meta humans, some industries are going to be skeptical about it. And just to give an example, one is of course the environment and how real it is, right? A lot of construction companies, a lot of real estate companies are considering it, and for them all of these things matter. But say hospitality industry, where the avatars and the gestures that the avatars use to actually greet customers becomes a prime factor for them to consider these spaces, right? So I think that's where we see reluctance, but we also see a lot of companies, as I stated in the previous answer, that the enterprise use cases of exploring these spaces for their employees is where we're seeing a lot of traction amongst our customers. If you look at what LTIMindtree did at their launch, we announced this in the Meta Hall, which is a metaverse space that we created for our employees to have town halls with the leadership, etc. So I think companies are trying to make employees the advocates of these spaces. So it is easier to then take it to the customers when you have your own employees who've tried these technologies and you understand how these can be applicable in the customer context as well. And like I said, right, we've done this for pharma companies, we've done it for technology companies, we're doing it for other consulting companies, and everybody wants to replicate a physical space for their employees, for them to feel nostalgic of working in a real organization space. So that's the trend that we're seeing in this space.
An excellent place to start. And I think what LTIMindtree and other firms like yours are doing are the right things. They're talking about what are the use cases, showing where places start. But maybe as a community, and I just don't mean your firm, I mean your firm, our firm, and many others, I think we need to start demystifying this. We need to start demystifying metaverse, demystify Web3 and NFT, and bring it to life, create North Stars, and not just show where we could go, but also how to go there in stages. And how to go there in stages in a way that the journey funds itself. Right, where can one make money across the way? Now, it could be a revenue thing, it could be an operations thing. But if we come together as a community and show where the North Star is and what the path to the North Star is and what we can do together, the system integrators of the world, together with the third-party advisors of the world, can lead the way in this journey. So that's why I'm glad you've started this podcast. You're bringing this up in in an environment like this, just to show the art of the possible, right? Something like this is the first step. So first, thanks for doing this, and also thank you for having me here.
Yes, Prashant, this has indeed been an interesting conversation. And on that note, I think it's a wrap.
Super. Thank you for giving us your time, Prashant. It was insightful.
It was an amazing session, and it's every time we listen to your talk around metaverse or anything that has to do with metaverse, it's extremely insightful. So this has been an amazing journey. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to see you post 24 months and look back at this podcast and see how much of what we spoke really materialized, right? That'll be interesting.
That's the real test. Yeah, Naina, thanks for having me. Saurabh, thanks for having me too.
Sure, Prashant.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Okay. Have a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye.